think after 3 years, I'd learned to unmute myself. All right. Is it Cadence? Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yeah, you did.
You did. Okay. So we're hoping a few more folks will join, but if they don't, do you just want to ask some questions or would you like to see the whole presentation? How are you feeling?
Yeah, I like to see the presentation.
The presentation? No worries. You can go ahead and do that, and hopefully some more people will come. But I don't know. Maybe it is too early to start thinking about grad school. All right. Okay. So this is just going to be kind of a general overview about professional and graduate school. If you would in the chat, just let me know kind of where you are in terms of like grad school or professional school. Are you like, I kind of am thinking about it, but I don't know. I'm pretty sure what I want to do. Kind of where are you? So you can put it in the chat or you can unmute. Oh, thinking about it. Okay. And how much would you say you know about grad school or professional school? Are you like got the basics down, or you still aren't sure of the different kinds? That sort of thing. And Aiden, just joining in the chat, if you'd put like how familiar you are with grad school or professional school, you kind of know the process. Are you just starting the process? Know very little, a whole lot? Very little. Okay, perfect. Well then we'll start with the types of degrees. So my friends, oh, I forgot to introduce myself. If you haven't met me before, my name is Karen Van Ness. My pronouns are she or they. I'm an academic support coordinator for CAS. I started out getting, I came to UCSD to get my PhD in literature. So I started out in a PhD program there. I made it through my qualifying exams, which I'll explain what those are in a minute. And then I decided, so if you're in, and if you two could drop like your major or like your field that you're thinking about, that would really help. But I can't, when you're getting a degree in the humanities, the way you pay for your doctorate is you teach. And I found I liked working with students more than I liked researching literature. So then I transitioned over into higher ed, and now I'm finishing up my EDD in higher education. Okay, size college. Okay, well, interesting. Okay. So you've got a couple of different degrees. One is a doctorate. So that's going to be like at least 5 years of your life. So that includes like an MD, so a medical doctor, a PhD, an EDD is like a practitioner's degree in higher ed or in just education in general. You know, PharmD, if you want to be a pharmacist, anything like that that has the word doctor in the title is going to be a 5+ year program for you. Masters can be, they're usually 2 to 3 years. There are a few programs. So Aiden or Adon? I want to make sure I say your name correctly.
It's Adan.
Adan, thank you. So for bio, they have a Bsms program where you can get your master's in 5 years. You take an extra year, and then you get your master's degree. So UCSD has a couple of those. There's one in education where you take 5 years, and then you get your teaching credential. There's also one through Grad School of Management where you can get your what's it called, MBA in an extra year. So it's nice because it saves you some time in terms of getting through grad school. Oh, Jeanette, if you would drop your major in the chat. Thanks for joining us. Okay, and then the last thing is the certification. So Frequently, these are 2 years. It can be shorter, it can be longer, but these are things like getting a certificate in teaching, getting like a kinesiology certificate. There's a couple of other things where it's not an actual master's degree or a doctorate degree. It's like a certification process. Social worker, for example. Urban science and planning. Thank you, Jeanette. Okay, so you have a doctorate, a MA, a master's degree, and then a certificate degree. And then those can be divided into 2 fields. So one is an academic degree. These are PhDs, sometimes MAs, like a master's of fine arts, can be a research degree or it can be a practitioner's degree. But basically, if you get one of these degrees, a research degree, you're going to be, sorry, I'm trying to mute. There we go. Outlook was yelling at me. So if you get an academic degree, it means you're either going to be a professor or you're going to be in research. So you may want to go into a think tank like Jeanette, if you want to do public policy or something like that, and you want to be part of a think tank or be part of a research group. If you want to go into medical research, that's the kind of degree you get. A practitioner's degree is more for getting a job. So for example, if you get an MD, you become a doctor. Most doctors practice medicine, right? A PharmD, you wanna become a pharmacist. Now you can also do research with those 2 degrees, but most of these are gonna be for practitioner degrees. So for Cadence, sorry. You can get a PhD in psychology, and that gives you a doctorate. So you could go into research or into practice, or you could get a PsyD. And a PsyD, a doctorate of psychology, is specifically for folks who want to be practitioners, right? So they're both doctorates, they're both in the same field, but they have kind of different foci, if that makes sense. So a practitioner's degree is really, you want to get a specific job. An academic or research degree is you want to go into research, if that makes sense. And, you know, it's blurry, right? There are doctors, MDs who do research. There are people with law degrees who do research. There's people with PhDs who have jobs outside of academia. So it's not a hard like line, but if you know you really want to do one or the other, it kind of helps, right? And generally speaking, academic degrees are better funded than practitioner degrees. A lot of times an MFA, EDD, like I've got my student loans, there's a lot of them. So you don't have as much support as you do in a research position, particularly in the sciences. The sciences are much better funded for research than they are for practitioner's degrees. Okay, so for example, you can be a doctorate in medicine. You can get an MD PhD if you're very ambitious. That's like a 7-year degree. And it lets you go into research or into medicine, or sometimes there's doctors/researchers, right? So we see this a lot in COVID, that they interview folks who are doctors, but are also doing research into, you know, COVID viruses. You can get a PhD in immunology. I mean, you just be researching, right? A particular virus, its vector, researching the virus itself, or doing more public health research into how people are getting, say, vaccinated, right? MD, PharmD, vets, these are dentists. There is a doctorate of nurse practitioners. It's not a really common degree, but you can get it. But some of these are very clearly more oriented towards research and some more towards practice. 2-year degrees. So a 2-year degree you can get in counseling is a 2-year degree, teaching is a 2-year degree, MBAs are 2-year degrees, physical therapy for the most part are 2-year degrees. There are some that are longer, a little shorter, depending on the type of physical therapy. A master's in social work if you want to become a social worker. Master of Science in Computer Engineering, a lot of folks get that. A lot of engineering jobs are asked for 2-year degrees. So if you want to go into like computer science, into structural engineering, electrical engineering. A lot of times, if you want to go right into industry, some of them you'll get better jobs if you have a master's, and then a master's of fine arts as well. And master's of fine arts is a terminal degree. There's very few doctors of fine arts. So if you want to go into painting or acting or performance, sculpting, those sorts of things, there's like 1 or 2 programs that are doctorates, but almost all of them are masters in the United States, at least. And I should say everything I'm talking about is in the US. Okay. So what's grad school like? So generally speaking, you start out taking gen ed classes, but these are very specified gen ed classes. So it's mostly for what you would take in your upper division classes, just a little bit beyond that. So you take, like my degrees in literature, my first 2 years, I took classes in literature, right? But I had to take and show breadth, right? So one class would be on poetry in the 20th century. Another class would be the novel in the 1800s in Jamaica, right? So they'd change, so I'd get kind of a little bit of breadth. If you're in the sciences, a lot of your work may be lab work, so you might rotate through labs. So first you'd be in a lab studying this aspect of chemistry, and then you'd be in another lab, another aspect of chemistry. But you do a little bit. Master's usually a year, a doctorate is usually 3 years of kind of general classes, and then you have some kind of exam or something. It may be an oral defense. I had to do an oral defense for my PhD. I had to do a written defense for my EDD. But you do some kind of exam or presentation where you sort of have to prove you have knowledge of what you've learned so far. And then you propose what you're going to do for your own specialty project, right? So you finish classes, you have this exam, it's really intense. It's like all your finals kind of combined. It's like super intense. And then the last part is your own project, right? So it may be in literature, it's writing a paper, a research paper, right? That's like several hundred pages long. So your thesis. In the sciences, it may be doing an experiment, right? And then you write up your experiment. My father's a math professor, and so in mathematics, your project is your advisor gives you a problem, and then you just have to solve it, right? So it's really like a general thing. If you're doing a practitioner's degree, it would be more project-based. So if you're in education, you may have to come up with like a plan and then implement it in the school, right? Or if you're in psychology, you may have to like do like hypothetically, like what kind of treatment program would you create, right? It's sort of like your own project where you're adding to the body of work as well. And the topics are like a lot narrower than they are in undergrad. So you'll be doing breath, but it'll be breath within a rather narrow field, right? And at this point, I'm going to pause. Do y'all have any questions? Okay. Is this kind of what you wanted to know? Yes, no? Okay. You can say no too. All right, thanks. So how you choose a school. So each school is different and each program is different. You really will be based on school to school and program to program. And even within one school, programs can be very different. So you may have a literature department that's very theory-based and a psychology program that's very practice-based. So you really want to not so much look at the school, but look at the program itself. And the way to do that is talk to your professors and your TAs and see like where they went, what did they do, you know, what schools would they recommend. I find that professors are really willing to talk to you about grad school. it's hard to become a professor. Like it's actually really hard. So the people in those fields are usually very passionate about their work, and they're usually really happy to talk to you. If you go in and say, hey, I'm thinking about getting a doctorate in urban studies and planning, you'll automatically become the favorite student because they'll be so excited that you're so excited about what they're learning. So, those are really the resources. We're very fortunate in that we're at a research school and we have really amazing faculty here, and they're very research focused, which in some cases can be a downside because they're not as teaching focused as you may hope sometimes. But if you're interested in grad school, it's great because you're interested in doing research. So go talk to them. You can reach out to the programs themselves too. Like if you have a professor you really admire at Harvard or at UT Austin or wherever you are, you can just write to them, send them an email and ask. You can also contact the program itself. They'll usually have a representative that you can just reach out to. You really want to ask about aid too, and think about aid when you're applying. There is no federally subsidized loans for grad school anymore. So if you take loans out for grad school, the interest rate starts accruing when you start. So just keep that in mind. And then think about what matters most to you. Again, these programs tend to be very small. Like a large program is like 20 people, right? So they all have very different vibes and foci. So like if what's really important to you is status and you want the top ranked school, then that's what you should go for. If what really matters to you is like having like a really warm, supportive environment, then that's where you want to go. Some med schools are very focused on technique. Some med schools are very focused on community, outreach. So they're all very, very different and they're very different vibes. So you really have to kind of talk and think about, what it is that you want to do as well, and what's important to you as a person, right? Because if you're in a very competitive environment and you're not a competitive person, like I'm not, I don't do well in like super competitive environments. I like chill. That's where you want to go. But if you need that competition to like push you, then you're not going to be happy in a more laid back program, right? So they're very, very small for the most part. And they're very, very different school to school, and then even within a school. Okay. So the question probably a lot of you have is, how do you pay for grad school? So it is expensive. There are a lot fewer sources of income for grad school than there are for undergrad. So that's something to take into mind, is that you will likely have to take on a little bit of debt unless you're super lucky or you get into like Jacobs is a very well-funded program here, right? But financial aid will usually come from the department itself. So you want to talk to the department and see what kind of funding you get. Still fill out your FAFSA just to be safe. You'll likely, particularly if you're in the social sciences or humanities, you'll likely have to work as a TA or reader. That's what I had to do. At UCSD, if you're a TA for at least 50%, they do rescind your tuition. So that's really nice. You still have to pay for food and housing on your own, but it helps a lot. So talk to the school, talk to the program, see what kind of funding they have, see how much you're going to have to work. Because if you have to TA a lot, that's less time you could spend on your classes, right? Professional degrees and master's degrees has less funding. So if you want to get a master's degree, really think about it and think about how you're going to pay for it, because it's less likely you will get funding. You can, though, like hustle and look on your own. There's some resources to look for individual scholarships you can apply to. So there are ways you can kind of cobble together some money. San Diego has a county-wide scholarship for grad students that you can apply to. It's called San Diego Fellows. So that's an option. But you will be more out on your own when you do this in terms of paying. And just a little hint, if you want to get a PhD, you want to get a PhD, right? It's usually cheaper to go directly into PhD program than to get an MA and then apply to a PhD. Usually if you have your master's and you apply to a PhD program, you don't start like halfway in, you start at the beginning again. And then the master's program is going to be less funded than the PhD program. So it makes more sense to go directly into the PhD program because it's going to be cheaper, it's going to be less years, so less years you're paying for, and it'll just be a little bit easier on you. Now, not 100% the case for every single school, but 90% of the time. I think a lot of folks think, well, I got my MA as a step to my doctorate, but if you know you want that doctorate, just apply to the PhD program. Most PhD programs, like, remember when I said you take classes and then you have an exam? When you take that exam, you also get your MA, which is how I got my master's, right? Is I took all my literature courses and then I had my qualifying exam, and then I got my master's degree after I passed the qualifying exam. So that's nice too, because that way, if you want to stop out, you can just like peace out, which is what I did with my master's. And then we have counseling in grad school. So I know I'm going over a lot and it seems overwhelming, but there are counselors in grad division that you can talk to as well. Okay, so preparing. So what you should be doing now. So I made kind of a diagram of what folks look at. They look at your GPA and your coursework. They look at your volunteer extracurricular experience, your work experience, your research experience, standardized test scores, and letters of recommendation, right? But again, this depends school to school and program to program, right? Like most, like you want to get a PhD in chemistry, they probably aren't going to care about your volunteer experience too much, right? You know, if a lot of schools are not really like in education, they don't look at standardized tests, so the GRE or the MCAT, they don't look at standardized testing too much in education because standardized testing is not very predictive of success in college or in grad school. And so people who research education know this, so they don't look at the test scores, right? So I didn't have to, thankfully, worry about my standardized test score, my GRE, when I applied to grad school. For the most part, if you want a PhD or you want to go to med or pharm school, like you have to do research. It's not an option. If you're applying for a PhD in a research program and you don't have any research and you attended a research institution, they're going to look at your application and wonder why, right? So just think about if you're interested in going, are there any of you transfers? You want to raise your hand or put it in the chat. Okay. All right, because as I say, if you're a transfer, you want to start looking for a position right away. If this is like your first year 4, usually you can start looking at the end of your first into your second year for research positions. Right. And then the other thing is letters of recommendation. It can be hard to make connections with faculty because, you know, that intro bio course has like 800, 700 people in it. So it's hard to meet professors. So that's again why research would be important. If you do a research experience with a professor, that can really help. Going to office hours, asking questions in class, you know, once you get to your junior year, doing an honors project, those kinds of things. So you can get a really strong letter of recommendation. I would love to write any of you a letter of rec, but they don't want to hear from some lowly student affairs professional, right? They want a letter from a faculty member. So I have written letters for people who are going into education, or for folks where I'm like the 4th letter and they need someone to talk about them personally. Or I've had a couple of students who had something tragic, like a student who was in a car accident and her grades dipped for 1 quarter. So I wrote a letter explaining what happened, right? So folks like me are good for that, but they really want like a professor writing your letter or like higher upper administration. I see there's a note in the chat. Sure, so research positions. Okay, so let me go to the right. So to go through, so your GPA is your grades. If you have a bad 1 or 2 bad quarters, if your first year is kind of bad, it's okay, right? There will be a few schools that will just want a 3.7 or higher. So you can't apply to those. There are plenty who, as long as they see like your grades going up, or like you just have one dip and then you're fine, that's okay, right? Volunteer extracurricular experience. So this would be experience where you're doing an internship, where you're volunteering, maybe through a student org, where you're doing some kind of leadership work, right? Or volunteer work where you're helping with, yesterday or this morning, someone mentioned Camp Kasem. So you do that kind of, volunteer. I know pre-med students have a thing where they go down to TJ and do some work with folks there. Any kind of volunteer experience, right? Work experience would be paid experience, right? So you have a job in the field that you've been doing for a while. Research experience is where you're working with a professor on a research project. So in the sciences, this would mean usually getting a position in a lab, right? Where you're working in the lab. Usually you start out doing pretty lowly work like pipetting or making slides. For like the social sciences and humanities, you may be doing like some bibliographical research. For a professor, so doing some background research. You may be helping, like in psychology, you might be helping doing interviews for someone who's researching, adolescent anxiety during COVID, right? And that's the professor's research project, and they're going to write a paper. And you would be helping that person do that research and write that paper, right? So looking to that, and I'll talk in a minute where you can go to find these types of positions in a minute. Okay. Standardized test. So just like you had to take your SAT for here, you have to take a test for grad school. So it's an MCAT for med school. There's a I can't remember the name of the pharmacy one, but you have to take a pharmacy one, which is supposed to be even harder than the MCAT for pharmacy. For most other programs, it's the GRE, which is the graduate entrance exam. And it's a big, long test. The GRE has 2 parts. Part 1 is a general exam, and then part 2 is a specialty. So you take like the general exam, and then like I had to take the one for literature. Right? And then a letter of recommendation would be, like you did for here, just a anonymous letter of recommendation. But again, they really want it from a faculty, and preferably a tenure track faculty. So someone who's full-time and has tenure here. Any other questions on these? Okay. Next slide. Oops, let me get rid of that. So our graduate assistant has a really excellent YouTube page. He is a like a grad school influencer. So I'll drop the link in the chat, but he has a lot of things that's step by step on applying to grad school. So like how to write your statement of intent for the application. So your personal statement, right? How to get letters of rec, what grad school's like. So it's a really useful YouTube page that I highly, highly, highly recommend to you. And then, sorry, I lost my mouse. There it is. All right. Okay. So you can think about talking to career services, grad division professors to learn about the application timeline, including when to take exams. It's usually the summer, either before or after your junior year is when you need to take the exam, no later than the summer after your junior year. So you want it before your senior year. You want to take your GRE or your MCAT. Letters of recommendation are usually very important. Research positions, including volunteer positions, you want to look for them in your field. UCSD does have BA and MA and Bsms programs. When you're close to applying, you can go to Career Services or the Writing Hub, and they will look over your personal statements and kind of your application in general and help you with that. And then key websites. So if you're like, Karen, what are you talking about? Internships, research? I don't know, right? So there are places you can go to find these. So the first is aip.ucsd.edu. That's academic internship programs. So these have all kinds of internship programs for you. And the good thing is they've been vetted by UCSD, so you won't wind up in some weird kind of sketchy position, right? You get academic credit for this. You do need 90 units or junior standing for AIP, but you get academic credit. If any of you are in 6th, it counts towards your practicum. I don't know if it counts towards 7th or not, but it does count towards 6th. So you get credit, and you can petition your major to have it count towards your major requirement. They may say no. Bio is super picky about what they allow, but you can ask them to apply it to your major requirements. The Real portal has like all kinds of research experience. So they have volunteer positions, they have paid positions. Usually if you get credit, academic credit, you can't be paid, or if you're paid, you can't get credit, right? And that's because you can't get paid for academic credit, right? Just a rule. So it's usually one or the other. And then the Undergraduate Research Hub is just like it sounds, right? It's where you go for all kinds of undergraduate research. So if you're interested in doing research, but you have no idea where to start, you can talk to the folks there. They do have a couple of summer programs that you could apply to that are bridged to the doctorate. If you're interested in a PhD, I keep on losing my mouse. All right. Mcnair Program. If you're interested in a PhD at all, I would highly recommend the Mcnair Program. It's a federal program. It's only for folks who want a PhD, so not an MD or not a master's degree. But they have a summer program, which is Bridge to the Baccalaureate, where they match you with someone to do a research project over the summer. They provide you housing, you get a stipend, free GRE classes. So it's a really, really good program. And then because it's a federally and very recognized program, a lot of times if you're a Mcnair student, institutions will waive your application fee for your PhD, which really adds up. So I know the UCs do, and I know the Ivies do, and I think some other systems do too. So, and Mcnair is through the Undergraduate Research portal. It's run by a man named Tom. Tom is super nice, very chill guy. So definitely look into that. All right, any questions or things I didn't talk about that you wanted to know? Got like a small group and plenty of time.
No, don't be shy, everybody. It's honestly it might be more of a blessing in disguise to have such a small group because you can have some one-on-one interactions with Karen.
And if you're really shy, you can DM me the question and then I'll answer if you like don't want folks to know. No questions? Did I overwhelm you or just answer all your questions? Let me. Okay. So I got a question. Can you use the resources after you graduate? So a lot of them, no, right? Now I will say you can put off your official graduation date until the end of the summer of your 4th year. So you have that extra summer to get stuff done after you finish your coursework. So that's a possibility. I do know people who do the Mcnair program like the summer after they finish their coursework. So they've graduated, but not officially graduated. So that can give you that extra summer. And then there are some things that you still have support with through the alumni network. So if you sign up to be through alumni, what's it called now? To be a UCSD alumni. They do have like a lot of resources for jobs, for resume building, for that sort of thing. And then while you're an undergrad, you can try and look for like professional organizations. There's like a math professional organization. There's one in literature, that's the MLA. APA is one for psychology. So if you join those while you're an undergrad, you can kind of get connected and get some support that way. And then you keep your connection to UCSD as an alumna. But some of the other programs fall away, right? It is a little easier when you're an undergrad because you literally, when you're an undergrad, can just go up to someone who has a cool job you want and be like, hey, I'm a student. I want to be like you, right? And just get away with it. For some reason, it doesn't make it random. So yeah, but I appreciate that it's like a tight schedule and you all have a lot of them on your plate, right? So what I would recommend is talking to a professor who you know, and kind of ask them like what they recommend in your field, right? And what's more important, like taking a lot of classes in your GPA or experience, right? So you know kind of what to focus on. Jeanette, you haven't even started and you're already worried about not having enough time. Other questions folks have? Okay. Well, the last thing I'd say for advice,
So if I want to pursue something in the medical field,
Mhm.
do I have to go straight to a medical school, or do I have to get my master's and my doctorate and then go to medical school?
no, so you'd go straight to medical school.
Okay.
Right? So you'd want to, start talking to the Career Center. Has some resources for future med students. And so they can kind of give you a guide of what kind of courses to take even within your major to make you a good candidate.
How do you spell that? Chris Center? Chris?
Oh, sorry. Let me put that in the chat. If I can spell UCSD. So you'd go directly there. So I think right now, start thinking about the courses you need to take, and then when you want to take the MCAT, because that thing is a beast.
Yeah.
I know.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions? Well, if you think of anything, you can always email me. And I'd be happy to answer your questions. And then if you need like a connection to a counselor at the Career Services Center or someone at Grad Division, just let me know and I'll do an e-introduction if you're shy about cold emailing. All right. Awesome. Well, thanks for coming, y'all. I know we had a small group, but I appreciate your time. I hope it was helpful. Allison, did you have anything you wanted to say to close out?
I honestly just thank you, Karen, very much. That was super informative, and even though I'm not a first year anymore or a first year transfer, that was very informative for someone who's also thinking about grad school. So thank you, Karen. And I have all of you logged for attendance, so no worries about that. And I guess we can end it just a little bit early here, 5 minutes early.
Yeah, and I had like one question for direct message real quick. So advice for someone who wants to pursue a grad school degree in a different major than the one you graduate in. It's fine, it's done a lot. It depends how different it is, right? Like if you want to go to grad school in anthropology and you majored in sociology, it's fine, right? Or you want to go to grad school in linguistics and you majored in literature, not a big deal. If it's really different, then just look for like opportunities either through a minor or through volunteer and research experience. So you have something to sort of show your interest in the field. So if it's close, like it's cog sci versus psychology or electrical engineering versus computer engineering or computer science, like that's not a big deal. But if it's very different, like you're getting a degree in chemistry and you want to go into social work, right? Then just look for, opportunities in internships and research, and maybe even declaring a minor. You can talk to your college advisor about that. But it's done. It's done. Some people, like, if you really, this isn't quite what you asked me, but like, say you're really not prepared to go to med school or grad school, people do get masters, right, in the field they're interested in, and then restart. So even that, there's always another way to go around it. Yeah, but it's not as big as a deal as people think. Yeah, like people get, like particularly a law degree, you can major in anything. It does not matter, and go to law school. And even med school, as long as you take the like required bio courses, you can major in like, I know folks who've gone to med school and have majored in like literature or the arts. And sometimes it makes you like a more unique candidate. So yeah, don't stress it. There's always a way.
Thank you very much.
Of course. All right. I'll hang on for just 1 minute if people have like another question. But other than that, thanks so much for coming. And I will see you in September.
Buddy, thank you. Okay, so I'll stop recording now.